Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We're going to be continuing to let people in, so we'll get started in a few moments. Please note that this panel is being recorded. We'll get started soon. Thank you. Morning, everyone. So we are just letting our participants come in and join us. So we will get started in just a few moments. Please enjoy the installation images to give you a sense of the exhibition before we dive into our conversation. Good morning, everyone. Welcome. It's so lovely to see so many familiar names on our screen. So thank you all for joining us. My name is Catherine Dennis, and I am the curator at the Art Gallery at Evergreen within Evergreen's Cultural Center out in Coquitlam. It is my pleasure to host today's panel discussion. This is presented in conjunction with the exhibition Inherit. The exhibition is part of the 2022 Capture Photography Festival Selected Exhibition Program. This selected exhibition is Capture's 2022 Printing Prize recipient, generously supported by West Group. So a big thank you to our colleagues and contributors here. As host for today's gathering and conversation, I'd like to share a few housekeeping details. Please note we are recording this panel discussion. Live closed captioning transcription is available. You'll need to turn it on, and we do apologize, of course, the technology is not perfect. And we'll all have to embrace the imperfections of technology as we get used to speaking in this digital space. For me, it's been a while since I've been on Zoom in this kind of context, so I'm looking forward to enjoying today's conversation. Time permitting, we will open our conversation to audience Q&A. And we will be using the raise hand feature, which you will find in the icon at the bottom of your screen. Please wait until Anna, our behind the scenes facilitator, invites you to unmute to ask your question, at which point we will remute you so that we can allow the artist time to answer in a fulsome way. With that, I would like to begin our program by grounding us with a land acknowledgement. I am personally speaking to you today from my home in East Vancouver, and the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. This panel is presented by the Art Gallery at Evergreen, which is located on the unceded, traditional, and ancestral core territories of the Coquitlam First Nation. This gallery serves the region that is today known as the Tri-Cities, but has been since time immemorial a shared territory of many Indigenous communities: the Tsleil-Waututh, the Stolo, the Kaikite, the Katzie, Musqueam, and Squamish. And of course, we gather in a virtual space that allows us to welcome guests from across Turtle Island and perhaps farther afield. This acknowledgement reveals both the privilege and responsibility that comes with living, working, and creating art in a country with a complex colonial history and present. The breadth of this acknowledgement also points to the limitations of these words and the need to use them as a call to action in our approach to curating and engaging with audiences. This statement of respect is a very small piece of a continual learning and unlearning process that for me personally takes place in part in person at events like this. I would now like to introduce Kate Henderson, the curator of the exhibition Inherit. Kate recently concluded her tenure as role of Interim Visual Arts Manager and Curator at the Art Gallery at Evergreen. Kate Henderson is a curator, public art consultant, educator, and arts and cultural worker who is deeply invested in socially engaged art, emergent practices, collaboration, and care. Kate is committed to amplifying the voices of emerging, underrepresented, and BIPOC artists, and she strives to decenter and interrogate the white, male, heteronormative legacy of Vancouver's art ecology by finding connections between artists that explore gender, equity, identity, caregiving, motherhood, decolonization, and the interstices between. She has held teaching and curatorial positions as such institutions as Capture Photography Festival, Emily Carr University of Art and Design, and the Vancouver Art Gallery. I will now turn things over to Kate to introduce the artists and to lead us in discussion this morning. Welcome, Kate.
Thank you so much, Catherine. That was a very generous introduction. I'm very excited to join you all today. So thank you. Welcome, everyone. Lots of familiar faces joining us from a sunny day here in Vancouver. So thank you. So before we begin, I want to start by situating myself here as well and honoring the land and host nations I'm joining you from today. So my name is Kate Henderson, and I am of Scottish, Irish, Welsh, and English descent, born on the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, Chippewa, Haudenosaunee, and Wendat nations, now known colonially as Toronto. And I acknowledge the racist and oppressive circumstances that made it possible for my great-grandparents to immigrate here from England in the early 1900s and I aim to dismantle and unlearn this history through my practice as an artist, curator, cultural worker, and mother. And for the past 30 years, I've lived as an uninvited guest on the stolen ancestral territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations in what is colonially known today as Vancouver. And I'm grateful and thankful to call this place my home, where I'm joining you from today. So before we begin, I'd like to introduce the artists who are joining us today. Zinnia Naqvi is an interdisciplinary artist based in Takaranto, Toronto. Naqvi's work has been shown across Canada and internationally. She is a recipient of the 2019 New Generation Photography Award, organized by the Canadian Photography Institute of the National Gallery of Canada, and was awarded an honorable mention at the 2017 Karachi Biennale in Pakistan. Naqvi is member of Amelia Amalia Working Group and Intergenerational Feminist Collective. She received a BFA in Photography Studies from X University and an MFA in Studio Arts from Concordia University. Recent solo exhibitions were presented at Dazibao and Pierre-François Houillet's Art Contemporain in Montreal. Born and raised in Germany, Birthe Piontek moved to Canada in 2005 after receiving her MFA from the Folkwang University of the Arts in Essen, Germany. Her work has been exhibited internationally, both in solo and group shows, and is featured in many private and public collections, such as the Museum of Contemporary Photography in Chicago and the Museum of Applied Arts in Gera, Germany. Birthe Piontek's project, The Idea of North, won the Critical Mass Book Award in 2009 and was published as a monograph in 2011. Her project, Abendlied, received the Edward Bertinsky Grant in 2018 and was nominated by Time magazine as one of the best photo books in 2019. The most recent work, Janice, was published by Gnomic Books in 2021. Birthe is an assistant professor of photography in the O'Dane Faculty of Art at Emily Carr University of Art and Design in Vancouver and is a member of the Kate Collective. Carol Sawyer is a visual artist and singer working with photography, installation, video, and improvised music. Since the early 1990s, her visual artwork has investigated the connections between photography and fiction, performance, memory, and history. Her ongoing and expansive project, the Natalie Brettschneider Archive, was recently exhibited at the Carleton University Art Gallery, the Vancouver Art Gallery, the Art Gallery of Greater Victoria, and the Koffler Art Gallery in Toronto. A book produced in conjunction with these four shows, titled Carol Sawyer, the Natalie Brettschneider Archive, was published in 2020. In 2017, the Canada Council awarded Sawyer the Duke and Duchess of York Prize in Photography, and in 2021, she was nominated for the prestigious Scotiabank Photography Award. So without further ado, we'll start the panel. So this is a panel format, so I will have a series of questions for each artist to respond to individually. But there's also room within that format for an organic conversation and discussion amongst ourselves. So I will begin with the first question. And you can choose whoever wants to go first. It can be organic. Tell us where you're coming from today and give us a brief introduction to your work in the exhibition Inherit at the Art Gallery at Evergreen. Who wants to go first?
I could go first.
Sure.
I'm sitting in my studio in lovely Vancouver, the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish nations. I'm really grateful to join you here today. I'm really grateful that I am included in this beautiful exhibition and, you know, have my work shown alongside these amazing people. So, and my work in this exhibition is from that project, Abendlied, which was published as the book in 2019. And Abendlied is a German word, and it translates to evening song in English. And it's not so much a documentation. I want to call it more like a collaboration of like 7 years, the past 7 years in my childhood home, where I'm originally from Germany, as Kate mentioned. And so every time I went back to Germany for about 7 years, from like 2011 to 2018, about that time, I would take pictures of my family and working with them, kind of capturing our emotions and our struggles and coming to terms with my mother's dementia. And the loss of my mother in that process, and also subsequently like the loss of our childhood home that was sold, and then my parents moved into a care home. So that's what my work is about in the show.
Thank you, Birthe.
I can go next if that's okay. Yeah, thank you so much for having me, and thank you to Kate for curating this beautiful exhibition, and for Anna and Catherine and the staff at Evergreen for having us all together. I am joining you today also from Toronto, so that is the territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, Anishinaabe, Chippewa, Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and today home to many diverse peoples and settlers like myself. So my project is called Dear Nani, and it's really based around images, photos that I found of my Nani, my grandmother. So that's my maternal grandmother, my mom's mom. And in these photos, she happens to be cross-dressing. So she's dressed up in the outfits from her husband. So the photos were taken in 1948 in what's now known as Pakistan. This was the year after the partition of India and Pakistan. So that territory, my mom's family is from Karachi, which was not directly affected by the division, although it received many refugees following partition. But yeah, so these photos were taken at a new kind of time in my grandparents' life. Also, it was their honeymoon. So when I came across these photos in a family album, I already kind of had a history of using family archival images in a lot of my practice. But when I found these ones, they were kind of just so extraordinary and so beautiful that I sort of knew I had to make a project about them. But my grandmother passed away when I was a teenager, so I wasn't able to ask her about what precisely was happening in the photographs. So I started to read a lot into the different clues that I got from the photos, different things. Also, my mom and her siblings knew about the photos when they were young, but because of the kind of relationships they had with their parents, they never really asked them directly about it. So to give a bit of context to my audience and to the photos, I wrote a fictional dialogue that accompanies the photos, in which I'm asking my Nani about what the photos are about. And sometimes she answers with facts. Sometimes she's like, oh, it's no big deal. It's just a silly dress up, because I wanted to maintain a bit of privacy and also accuracy as to that's how I think she would answer if I was to ask her about the photos. Yeah, and then together I've included photos of myself, self-portraits in which I'm taking on position of her poses, and also children who happen to be in the background of some of the images, and different artifacts as well that my Nani is holding.
Thank you, Zinnia.
The work that I have in the show is called The Scholar's Study. First I should say that I'm also joining you from what's now known as Vancouver, the unceded ancestral territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. And I feel pretty lucky to be here, this beautiful place. My body of work, The Scholar's Study, that's shown in this show, documents a time where I was dismantling the archives and study of my father, who was an art historian, and he had also had dementia. So there was a long period where really nothing could be touched in his studio as we kind of dealt with his illness, and then there was this kind of layer of confusion over everything as well. And taking it apart was almost like an excavation, and it was somewhat ironic because he was an archaeologist. And he had a very strong persona, so he was often very difficult to get along with for me. I had a quite fraught relationship with him, but when he got dementia, we actually got a bit closer because it felt like a lot of this constructed persona stripped away, and I got a glimpse of sort of who he was, like underneath, like who he was as a child even. And that sort of allowed me to think about my relationship with him and some of the things that he had given me. And in the show, there's a video called The Scholar's Study that I made along with one of my ex-students, Erica Ranali, who was helping me in this big process of dismantling. And what happened is that we just sort of got completely blown away by just looking at these plexiglass stands and how the light was changing them. And a lot of the photographs show these stands that were once holding artifacts and now they're just empty and sitting around. And in the process of making the video, I realized that one of the gifts my father had given me was his love of looking and his just excitement at the beauty of the world, and how core that was to who I had become, you know, building my life around looking at things. So, yeah, so that's the scholar study.
Thank you, Carol. Yeah, the next question sort of ties into some of the things you've already been talking about, but it's always a good question to just get into the heart of process is, tell us a bit about your creative process and what led you to make these works. And was there anything kind of unexpected or surprising in the process of making these works?
Am I going first again? Do we do this?
That format?
Is this okay?
Sure.
We established that now. Okay, just making sure. So yeah, what led me to make the work? I don't know. I didn't when I started this in 2011. I definitely didn't anticipate. I didn't know. I didn't have a plan at all, like why I was doing this and what I was attempting to do. I think in the beginning, I thought I was working on a different project that focused a lot more around on my domestic space here, my home here, and my relationship to that, and my body, and I was looking at objects here, and I think in the beginning when I started taking pictures in Germany, it was more. I was thinking like it could be more an extension of that project. Like I was kind of like, oh, I'll just see what happens if I include images from Germany in that project. But really, like within the first few iterations, I realized that this is not going anywhere, and that this is actually a really separate thing. And it was around the time that my mom showed the first signs of dementia, but Carol, you might know this, and every person who has witnessed the onset of dementia, it's a really gray area. It's not like, oh yeah, now you can really, point at it. It's in the beginning, it's very fluid and very, you're just like, oh, maybe they're just having a bad day or something. So for the first little while, like obviously we were hoping, I mean, we had seen all this with my grandmother, but who passed away of Alzheimer's 20 years earlier. But we were obviously like, you're in denial. And so anyway, so it wasn't like this, like, oh yeah, this is what's happening. I need to make work about this. It was, and I don't know how that is for Zinnia and Carol, but I guess it's like for all artists I have met, there's sometimes you just have a little bit of that urge or that hunch, and that gut feeling that just pulls you in this direction, that you just feel like, I don't know what it is, but I just need to keep going here. And so, but in the beginning, I thought it was like really, for the first 2 years, I want to say, because you just like, I just go home for like maybe 3 weeks, 4 weeks in the summer, maybe over Christmas. And these first iterations were just like, oh, it was really kind of more like an archive of like looking at the house, these objects that I had grown up with. I focused a lot more on the objects in the beginning and not so much on my family. But I had like already over, like since I started photography, since like I guess like having my first camera at like 14 or 15, my family had always been part of, or had been like in front of the lens. So it kind of felt natural that at some point I would include them. But yeah, in the beginning, I was like, oh, this is like a really personal thing. Like it's just kind of me expressing my longing for that place, and maybe the kind of homesickness that I sometimes have here, and missing my family. And so thought I'd make work about it, but and just like do this really personal project for myself. But then over time, I quickly realized that it grew more and that it was bigger, and especially also seeing and witnessing the decline of my mom and the impact that that had on the house. I really knew, like we all knew where that would end. And so, and then I think it wasn't so much like a documentation, it was more a coming to terms, like kind of like a grieving process through taking pictures with my family and kind of inviting them into that grieving process. So, yeah, I feel like I took already a lot of time. So has that complicated my relationship with memory? I'll fold that answer in my next my next answer. So I'll just pass it on.
Yeah, so I guess, yeah, just going into why I made the project. I mean, I think I mentioned it was kind of, I felt like the source material really called to me more than like, it just felt like they were so, what I had found was so stunning that it almost felt like I kind of had to make a project with them. I mean, obviously if I wasn't an artist, that would be different, but the challenge was for me is like how to show these images in a way that was, I felt historically accurate and accurate to my culture and to my family as well. Because especially as an artist who is working in the West, in Canada predominantly, there's a very different way that these photos can be read from like a Western feminist perspective, as opposed to an Eastern perspective, and especially like taking in the colonial context of the images. And so that was something I really felt was really important and really at the kind of crux of what the performance was about. But it was kind of hard to show that to my audience. And then that's when kind of like, I guess when you're asking about surprises and things like that, that's when I started looking at beyond the kind of main performances, like different things that were happening in the background and different props that my grandmother was holding, for example. So in the series, you'll see excerpts from, there's a children's dictionary that she's holding, which was kind of a textbook for children that my family loved. My mom actually immigrated with these books with her because she loved them so much. And they're really stunning as well, objects, but they also have a lot of really like problematic imagery in them. And it kind of shows the sort of British education that my grandparents were receiving as well, and how this sort of idea of like almost like marketing the colonial or like the British Empire and the colonial project to many different people all over the world, which was seen as positive, but then also had a lot of like negative things sort of hidden in them. So yeah, thinking about all the different sort of unread or not so obvious clues that I got from different things that are happening in the photographs.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah, I like that. That talking about the clues is interesting for sure. Yeah, thank you. Carol.
Sorry, what was the question?
Okay, about your process.
Oh, my process.
About what led you to make these works, but also if there's anything that's sort of unexpected or surprising that comes up in the process that is bound to happen when we're making art.
Yeah. Well, it was just, let's see. I think a big chunk of my life was taken up with looking after elderly parents and kind of coping with their, taking care of them and managing their lives, and then also dealing with their stuff. My father, he had a museum in his bedroom when he was a child. Like, he was such a collector of things. So there was just this vast amount of stuff to process after they died. And so I think I take pictures to kind of understand things sometimes, like I just thought, like it really ate a couple of years of my life just dealing with this house full of stuff, and and a lot of it being cultural objects from cultures that aren't my own. So like a really big responsibility to deal with. So taking photographs helped me to at least sort of hold on to something of who I am through the process, and help me to, like, it was just this wanting to record too, this kind of visual complexity. So yeah, I guess I shoot because that's what I do, although that sounds a bit lame, but it is kind of my way of understanding a lot of experience, and holding on to something of who I am within a pretty overwhelming circumstance where I'm required to do a lot of things that aren't my core work, so yeah, so shoot your way out of a situation. That's what we say. I didn't really know what I was doing. It's actually a huge, huge archive, and then it was quite a long process to decide what to extract from it and what images I wanted to share with other people, and how to make the video and so on. So it did really help me understand a lot about what the experience had been for me emotionally, and I think I learned more and gained more insight from the whole thing by making art about it.
Well, that kind of segues quite nicely into the next question that's specifically about photography. So thinking about photography and lens-based media as, intrinsically linked to time and memory. So in what ways has photography assisted with your process of remembering, or how has it further complicated your relationship with memory? And, this is a larger question, but why photography? What is it about photography that, is at the crux of your practice, I suppose?
Okay, I'll take a stab at that. I love that what you said, Carol, about grounding yourself or finding yourself. You said it really beautifully in, by taking pictures. And so maybe that's like my first answer as well. Like I'll just feedback on that. So Carol said it so nicely. There's something, I guess, in making work and in looking, I had another conversation with a friend the other day, and we're talking about our relationship to the camera and our relationship to home. And he said something that really resonated with me. He's like, I feel at home when I look through the viewfinder. And I could really, that really resonated with me, even though I am very curious in my practice to, I actually moved away a little bit from just only purely lens space. I really am curious, like Zinnia and Carol, I feel like there's a bit we're working on the fringes of photography. We're really very much lens based, but then we're kind of excited, and it kind of, the exciting stuff seems to happen when other things get introduced as well, other elements or other art forms, for Carol, performance, or for me, it's I'm really interested in sculpture and really the material way of also that photography can manifests in the space. So, but yeah, so I feel why photography is to the very autobiographical straightforward answer is my grandfather was a photographer. I grew up with this with cameras and dark rooms, and I by the age of 15, I knew that this was something I wanted to do. It was just this, yeah, this is it. And it had this feeling of being at home in that. And so it's interesting to look at it. I came here to Vancouver and didn't know I would stay. For the longest time, it didn't feel like home. I always felt like I was a visitor, but I also felt like a visitor when I would go back to Germany, because that also wasn't my home anymore. So there was something really grounding in that experience of taking pictures and being with a camera. And so it became my home in that way. But I think in terms of the question of time and memory, I guess when I started taking pictures, I definitely had the sense of I'm capturing something, I'm freezing a moment, and it gets preserved for forever, and I can hold on to it. And the longer I
Oh, sorry, Birthe, you're unmuted.
somebody muted me.
Oh, how
It's
rude.
enough. of her.
Yeah, I don't want to hear it.
I'm like, okay, I'll be done in a second.
Oh my God.
So okay, long story short, I feel like my relationship with photography and memory has become a lot more complicated, and it's become like I kind of, as if I like realized like it really doesn't help me much with remembering things, and it in many ways like maybe causes me more pain than, you know, because the more time passes and then you look back and then it's like, oh, I don't even want to see this, and it's so far, like I can't even, my own brain has like meshed things up in this weird way, and it's not clear, and I can look at the picture but I'm like, did that really happen? So I feel like I've let go of this idea of that, like photography assists me with memory, I think. And in this, like what it does is like photography assists me with grounding myself, and it assists me with coming to terms, and it assists me with expressing myself and finding a language and relating myself to the world. And especially in this project, which is really interesting, and you know, it's like it's about losing your memory. It's about my mom, watching my mom when things, you know, like started to become really jumbled for her, and time was really fluid, and she would address me as her, you know, her mother, or then she would look at my dad and would think like it was her younger brother, and you know, like everything was like, and now the only thing she might like remember is like her early childhood, and she doesn't have any recollection of like who I am. And so I think in that case, and I think also like in my way of how I approach the project, it's a big mess. It's a big jumbled of, you know, juggling times and eras and memories from our childhood and objects from our childhood combined with objects from the Second World War, and that like really crazy intertwined history that is, you know, like every German family has like some sort of history there. And so it's all meshed up. I think that's what it is. And it's a really complicated, messy relationship. That sounds more depressing than I actually mean. It's a beautiful relationship too.
Yeah. It's also a way of letting go too.
Yeah.
The process of letting go. Yeah. Thank you, Birthe.
Yeah, I think like Birthe was saying, like I guess I also just feel like, I mean, why photography? It's like, not that I mean, I grew up with it, but also like I've had, like, I think a reason I turn to my family archive so often in many of my projects is almost like a place to start, because, well, I'm really lucky to have a lot of really incredible material. So, you know, my dad was very particular about documenting every vacation, everywhere he lived, like very, like we just have a lot of images. And same with my grandfather. So he was the one, my grandfather, my Nana was the one who took these images, and it's his suits that Nani is wearing. And he was also very particular about having my mom and her siblings, like they would go to a photo studio every year for their birthday to get their photo taken. And, you know, at that time, it wasn't something that a lot of people would prioritize, but he really wanted them to have that. So I'm just kind of, I feel like lucky to have inherited all of this material to work with. And I guess it just, you know, kind of worked out that I happen to be an image maker myself. But again, it's like, I feel like even when I'm working with kind of like more, I guess, vernacular images, like it's really about, there's kind of like what's going on, but I'm always also like looking around, like what's going on around the main subject, or what's going on in the back. What am I supposed to be learning from this place? What am I, you know, why would they be there? But also like what led them to, you know, different things that kind of led to these different circumstances. And then I don't always have the answers. And then that's when I'll often turn to my parents and have like conversations with them. And they're like hugely supportive and collaborative. You know, even actually my parents even took some of the images, because I have a lot of self-portraits in the series. And they actually took some of the images of me because I wanted to make my own presence known within the project. But you know, me doing the exact same thing that Nani was doing in 1948 is like a completely different context. So I didn't want to do the exact same performance, but I wanted to also like have my hand be a parrot in the fact that I'm like looking and making these interpretations. So that's why I kind of frame the images the way that I do. But yeah, I I think that, does that answer your question? Like, I guess, oh yeah, memory. Well, maybe I'll get to that in the next question
Sure,
too,
yeah,
because
there's other questions sort of related to that. Yeah. We can save that for later. Thank you.
Yeah, I was thinking too, like with photography, it has this relationship to time and to memory, and it also has this lingering image of, or lingering aura of realism, that it has this indexical relationship with something. So it makes it a really great medium in which to tell your own fictions, or, I mean, I've used it a lot as a performative space where I've made stuff up, and photography can add this kind of credence to things. So it also I think helps me to feel like I can sort through something and extract, like the situation that I was trying to document was in many ways so chaotic. By photographing it, it gave me some sense of like that I had some agency in this situation, and that I could make something for myself out of this big family responsibility. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, the next question, I don't think we'll have time to address all the questions, but I'm going to jump ahead to this next question. So in a sense, these works that you're doing, they make the intangible tangible. They speak to what it's like to live inside a body, the memory, grief, and curiosity or longing that is held within our bodies. So could you speak to these works or the creation of these works as a kind of embodied experience of memory? And Birthe, if you want to start.
Yeah, I'm just like, okay,
Big
slowly
one.
unmuting myself and buying myself a little bit of time.
As we're in this embodied space, let's talk about embodied.
Embodiment.
Yeah, disembodied rather.
Disembodied. Okay. I think this is what art does. No matter what kind of medium you're working in, but it is what it definitely does for me. It's like I'm trying to give form, literally, like body, to, and whether that is a photograph, whether that is other materials I'm working in. I'm currently knitting a big sculpture. Just on a side note, giving like basically charging that, or like working with the objects in my photographs, working with the objects with my family in the photo, like this, like charging them with an emotion, right? Like it's like a memory. Like I feel like they all live under the same umbrella. Like the memories, our unconscious minds, our emotions, they're all like intertwined, right? Like they all like sometimes really hard to express in words, right? I mean, some people do that really beautifully. I can't. I don't have that kind of relationship to language, but so I don't know if my work is if I'm like if it's all about, you know, given form to memories. That definitely is a big part of it, especially in that particular work. It was also about given form to grief and loss and the struggles, but also like the funny moments, you know, like the decline of my mom happened alongside the that my nephew and my niece were born, and their growth. So there's a lot of hilarious moments, or there were a lot of hilarious moments between my mom and, you know, or us and the kids, and, you know, and how kids are. And my mom in the beginning was like very aware of like what was going on, and she's like, yeah, you have to point that out for grandma again, because I don't, it's like, oh, my niece would be like, Oma forgot everything, and, you know, so there was a lightheartedness too, but in general it was like you know, like trying to express these things with them, like interacting with each other and interacting with these emotions and these objects. So and as they're interacting and performing in some ways with these objects are from the past, and those objects have a memory. And I think in some ways I was trying to, so coming back to this idea of like the embodied experience of memory, I was trying to enact or give form to these memories that we had, or to our family's history or family's past, because I also knew that like a lot of these objects we wouldn't take with us, and we didn't know even like why some of these, you know, like we all have these objects in our houses that we're just like, where's that coming from? Like, why do we have this? Who gave us this? You know, like, I don't know, this like funny plate, or like a set of cups, or even like clothing, right? And it's like, I think that was grandma's, maybe it was, you know, and the, in many ways I'm like trying to express the confusion that my mother had of like not knowing where all these things came from and where they belong to. She would constantly misplace them. And so there's part of like there's an embodiment of misplaced memories, maybe, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's nice. I haven't thought of your work in that way, but yeah, I like that. Zinnia.
Yeah. I mean, for me, like this project, you know, I didn't know my grandmother very well. Like I probably, I spent more time with her when I was very young, and she passed away when I was a teenager. And when I started to make work in this project, I was definitely concerned about that. And it was a way for me to get to know a part of her that I never would have had access to otherwise. But even for my mom, like a lot of the information that I have about my grandparents is coming from my mom. And I think she had a pretty like formal relationship with her parents as well. And it was, I think, a way for both of us to kind of like get to know these people when they were young, and like having a fun time, and like, you know, just like there's just so much like youth in her smile and her photographs that we never would have been able to kind of appreciate otherwise. So it just like obviously changed our relationship to their memory, I think, in this way, and definitely like just made new memories, made new conclusions. But like yeah, like there was definitely like, it was a concern for me as well, like for example, like would Nani even want to be part of this project? And that's always a concern of when you're working with someone who isn't around anymore. And the way I kind of chose to, you know, try to do work with these photos as ethically as possible is like just being in conversation with my mom and her siblings. Like, are you happy with the way I've approached the project? And my mom would, you know, often say that Nani like maybe wouldn't get what the big deal is about the photos, but your grandfather would be super happy because he was a photographer and was super actually interested in art as well. So yeah, just trying to kind of like make a relationship that wasn't really there at the time, wasn't able to exist, but I think I have a new found relationship with them that means a lot to me. So yeah.
Yeah, that's really beautiful.
I guess that like the photographs, like of course inevitably they're a bit about memory because of like the experience of trying to support people who are losing their memory. But one of the things that struck me about the experience of watching my father get Alzheimer's and lose his memory is that I'd had a kind of difficult relationship with him. He was a big personality and he had a big persona. And what I felt like happened over the course of his illness is like the persona kind of started to fall away. And he forgot, like he knew so much about different kinds of cultural objects and where they were from and how to, you know, what their context was. And it was his job, his life's work, you know, to know all this stuff about things. And then, but that fell away. And then sometimes he would just be looking at something and he'd be like, I don't remember what this is, but isn't it amazing? So it was like a lot of the persona that he built up that I found difficult. stripped away, and then I got to see a bit of who he was under that. At the core of a lot of what I was seeing was just somebody who was amazed to look at things. And he had really bad eyesight. Like, he couldn't see well at all without his glasses. And he didn't get glasses that helped him to correct his vision until he was like 9 years old, maybe. And he told me that when he first saw things in focus, he was like completely stunned, that he just couldn't believe it. And then he built his whole life on looking really closely at things. And I realized in the process of making this work that I was really grateful to him for giving me that. So it was like a kind of discovering for me kind of things about my relationship with him that had gotten covered up by the difficulty of his big big demanding persona, and then dealing with his illness and so on. And then just thinking, right, when I was a kid, he would just be like a bird or a seed pod or something. He'd be like, isn't this amazing? And like want to look at it with you. And of course that was a huge influence on my life. So yeah, so it was sort of like the whole piece, making the whole piece was like this excavation in so many different ways of like peeling off these different layers of stuff and experience and memory, and the photography became a way to just sort of track that to a certain extent. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I guess like one of the kind of last larger questions we could talk about is, thinking about how, all three of your projects addressing familial relationships. Carol, you're talking about navigating a strained relationship with your father, but then also like really honoring his love of observing and looking. And then Birthe, the slow kind of loss of your mother through her ongoing battle with dementia. And then Zinnia, seeking to gain a better understanding of your grandmother, and kind of why, trying to dig into why this set of sort of peculiar and interesting images were taken. So in a way, these particular individuals, there's three individuals. There's Nani, there's Birthe's mother, and then there's, Carol's father, thinking about how they live on through the work. So maybe you could, and you've spoken to this a little bit already, but thinking about, talking about loss, grief, and longing in your work, and how this process could be, the process of making the work could be a form of healing and reconciling with the past. So maybe each of you could speak to that specifically, about how this process is, again, a process of letting go or healing or learning or unlearning a certain past.
Yeah, it's interesting that the project, the times when I would take pictures of my mother are the times now that I have these moments are like the last moments I have of her when she was really there. Even though she was sick already, like I feel like there was something, it was like a really beautiful kind of magic that happened. And maybe it was that really undivided attention that she got from me, and she realized like there's the camera and these images are really quite collaborative. And these were the moments where she would be really present and we would talk. And so in a way, it's interesting for me, even though those images were created as a, let's say, like, even though I didn't really quite know at the time, but like, let's say they now live as this art project and they live in this book, and they're not like family images. They're not like, they weren't like created to hold a memory or to kind of acknowledge an event or something. But obviously that's what they do to me when I look at them, right? Like when I look at an image of, all these images where my mom is in, I remember how it was created, and I remember the conversations we had, and I remember the tender moments that we had in making these, or these kind of really painful moments where I remember there was an image that didn't make it in the final edit, but I was taking a picture of my older sister and my mom. And my mom is standing outside on the balcony, and my sister is inside in the room, and they're separated by the window. And I was obviously like totally like I was in the zone, making, like, can you turn it? And I see that my sister is crying, and she looks at me and she says, don't think that I don't know what you're trying to express, and I'm feeling this, what you're trying to express. Because yeah, like when you're like so wrapped up in, like, this is what I have in mind and I want to do this. And so my whole family is really was really aware, maybe not my mom so much, but my mom got something else out of it, in terms of the kind of being present and the kind of conversations we had. But I know that my sisters and my father were really very much aware of what we were doing and why we were doing this. And they could feel the emotions that I tried, the grief, the confusion. They felt that when they were in those, not always, but quite often, when they were in these moments, like when they're performing in that way. And so I feel like, it would be probably a big statement, and I wish they were here so they could speak to that, but I feel like there was something in this, in the process of making it, and it's still like in the, when we're looking at it, and I think that was also why it was really important for me to bring it together in a book, to kind of have that journey, to be part of that journey, and to have that. And then now I'm kind of coming back to this, like at the very beginning, this question to time and memory, and now I'm speaking very much to photography's ability to do that, like to kind of to kind of have that testament of like, this happened, and this is and mom was part of this, and she was part of this journey, and this was our journey in letting go and in transitioning into this new chapter. And so I think in that way that project helped, and it was really, really meaningful. And I think especially and that's the last thing, and I shut it, my nephew and my niece were really quite little when all of that happened. And so I think there's something really, I hope, something for them, like, when they're older and they have that book, and they're part of it, and they can understand it, and they look at it, and they obviously encounter these images in a different way. But right now, like, I was like, oh, why am I naked in this, or why am I doing this or that, like, why do I have all these teeth lying on my back? And but they're a part of it, and it's like really important for them in terms of like having that contribute to their muddled memories over time. So yeah.
Oh, that's powerful. Just the image of your sister crying and having an understanding of what's going on is just really moving. And yeah, that, and the sense of your niece and nephew, this sort of like intergenerational memory that you're giving them is really powerful and really meaningful. So thank you.
Yeah, no, that was really powerful. And yeah, I think like for me, as I said, like I didn't really have much of a relationship. So I never met my grandfather at all. And then I didn't have a very close relationship with my grandmother. So this was a way to also just kind of like understand these people who maybe I would know as a grandmother, but also understand them in a way that's like more multifaceted, and also just like they've lived a whole life that I'm never going to know about. And also I wanted to like maintain some of that privacy as well in the project. So that's why like when I wrote the text in the way that I wrote it, where she kind of refuses to answer some of my questions, is because I know that if I asked her, she wouldn't answer because why would she want to talk to her grandkid about her honeymoon, right? She wouldn't want to like answer those questions necessarily, like it was private. So I wanted to kind of keep that element of like cheekiness also of her. And there was a certain like cheekiness into the way that they're performing as well. So it's kind of like, oh, no big deal. And like, of course it's a big deal in terms of like politically and like for the time period that, yeah, it's a really profound performance that they're doing, but in terms of like their, you know, romantic relationship, they're allowed to like just be in love and like be young and not be kind of carefree. So I wanted to kind of keep some of that in the project as well. And yeah, I think it's like, yeah, it's helped all of us, like me and my mom especially, like just understand. Well, I think for her parents also as multifaceted people. And I also have been fortunate to just make a photo book as well for the project. And I know like just, I've also had the opportunity to show the work in Pakistan and like being able to actually share that with people, with my actual family. And then I also have this documentation that I know a lot of my like cousins and things have bought copies. They're like, oh, I'm going to keep this one for my kid too. So we can all just kind of remember our grandparents in a different way. Yeah, because there's so much life that was lived that we're never going to know about.
Mm-hmm. And I think part of that for you, like part of that processing of memory or like understanding of that memory is literally putting your body in front of the camera to recreate some of those scenes as well. Like that really, I mean, that really is pure embodied memory there and a way of processing with the past and putting yourself into the photographs. So
yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Carol.
Yeah, I think making this work was healing for me in terms of kind of processing my relationship with my dad that was, you know, often pretty fraught. But I think one of the things that happened as he had Alzheimer's, and I don't know if Birthe, if you experienced this too, is that I started to feel quite protective of him because he was very vulnerable. And he was really looking to the people around him for cues about how to respond to situations, like sort of like he would sometimes be quite vulnerable. And so I got to see, I felt like a lot of who he was underneath this very large persona that he had as a professor and as a professional expert, a curator. He talked publicly a lot. So he had like this big public persona that sometimes you're just like, oh God, or I was anyways. So yeah, he became very vulnerable. And then even in making the video, I kept discovering things about kind of things that he had taught me when I was a child and how much he encouraged me to look at the world and his just wonder, his sense of wonder at looking and seeing things, and how I'm sure that encouraged me to be an artist, to, you know, to be, I mean, when you're working with lens-based media, and I'm sure a lot of other media, a lot of it is just kind of being observant and being alert to what you're seeing and how it can carry meaning and convey meaning to other people. So, you know, I felt like it helped me process the relationship that I had with him quite a bit, and discover and sort of reclaim parts that were positive. You know, feel grateful to him for these gifts that he had given me that I was most of my life too pissed off at him to acknowledge, because just had a, you know, really obstreperous relationship with him from the time I was a teenager until, I don't know, until he got sick. So yeah, that was a real gift. Yeah, for sure.
Thank you. I think we have time for one last question. Just I'd like to know any, you know, have these particular works raised any new questions for you in terms of, you know, the trajectory of your practice? What's coming next for you after these works? And then do you have any questions for each other? And then we'll go into the question and answer. So we've just got a couple minutes before we should wrap that.
Okay. What's coming next in the questions? It's so interesting because I feel like there's always something that carries forward, that gets carried forward from like the one project to the next. I feel like they're all like tied together in this invisible thread, or visible probably also. But yeah, so because at some point you feel like, okay, this project is done. And in my case, it was pretty much also determined by the fact that my mom had gotten too sick to collaborate, and I stopped taking pictures of her when she just wasn't, I didn't have her consent in a way anymore. And it was also, we had, like, they had moved and they had let go of all these objects, and they were in this new place. And so I ended up, that felt like almost like the project had come to like this really natural conclusion in this way. And then, but what has carried over into, or what has already, like, you know, has informed my work for so long, is still like this attempt to look at objects, or to engage with objects, or in this finding this like hybrid in between space where still life meets installation meets performance, I think. And sometimes there are these, that urge of bringing these together, like results in a photograph, and sometimes it results in an installation for me, or in a sculpture. But it's kind of this constant like push and pull between an object, the photograph as an object, which, you know, like thinking about the physicality of a photograph, working with found material, or with own archival material as well. And so this kind of 2D, 3D dance. And so for me, so what happened after that Ardent Lead project was that I worked on this other project, which happened to be, you know, also like then the time of COVID. And so that's like, it really focuses on myself, my body, my engagement with objects. And there is something in that engagement and in that kind of dance between the object and the body that is already there in the Ardent Lead project that I carried forward into the next project, the Janice work that opens today at Gallery Jones. Little advertisement. But then I'm also thinking about like I'm also like already working on a whole new project that just revolves completely just like around found materials, like photographs that I bought on eBay. That is something that I've done for like a long time now, for over 10 years. And that I'm working in like for the first time, like actually working in more digital collage. Like usually like when I'm working with these things, I'm working in a really physical way, but this time it's I'm working digitally with them. And so, yeah, so I'm kind of like, I feel like I always have these like comes and goes in waves of like working with found material, and then like creating images myself, and then coming back to the object. So there's like, it's always like this kind of weaving of the different strands, and then just finding different iterations in different ways. But it always, I think, revolves around my idea around making something intangible, like memory, how we are shaped by our unconsciousness, by the ways we grew up, by the ways we were like informed, culturally informed, like how these things that are kind of like these invisible forces in us, like how can I make those visible? So, and that's what I'm still working on, and I might not be finished anytime soon with that.
Thanks, Birthe. Zinnia?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, like I started showing this work in like 2016, 2017. And in some ways, like I felt like it was actually like too fast, like too quick to be like showing the work publicly, because it is such a like private project, but it's almost like developed through the process of exhibiting it. And like each time I've exhibited it, it's also changed in different iterations. So now that I have the book, I do feel like it's like maybe mostly wrapped up, but never, never say never. Yeah, like I think one thing to like Birthe, I was just like, I'm constantly working with family archives or different source material and interrogating the function of images, or fictionalizing evidence from different sort of found objects or different video, whatever. So all of that will probably be like what my work is about. But like with this project specifically, like the dictionaries that appear in the work are like pretty crazy, and they're beautiful. They're just such beautiful books, but they're also like problematic in a way, and this kind of like speaks to this like duality and like I think like legacy of like citizenship and like colonialism, and so that's something that I've been wanting to, and like maybe this summer I'll finally get some time to like dive into the books on their own. Like I think they could maybe be their own project, so that is something I want to think about a bit more. And yeah, I have a question for Carol and Birthe, but I'll wait till the end. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think that this the scholar study project was somewhat unusual for my practice in that it was fairly documentary and in some ways is fairly straight, at least the photographs, because a lot of my work I'm really using the veracity of photographs, like that truthful appearance of photographs, to tell lies. I really love that about photography, that it's like I can make stuff up and it can seem real because it's like a photograph, it's like a document. So I've been working on a project that's more that kind of goes between photography and video, that is more obviously constructed. So I'm thinking back to work that I made, probably the first mature work I made. I was photographing objects and cutting the negatives up and taping the negatives together to make fictional objects, because I love how, because it's a photograph, then it looks real. So even when you look at it and you go, that can't be real, the part of you wants to believe it. And I find that very interesting about photographs. So yeah, I'm kind of revisiting some of those ideas in a different way, compositing these fictional kind of tableau made up of real elements. Yeah, but I think photography has always been for me this space in which I could kind of control what happens and tell my story, or I don't know, like it's something very powerful about that things seem realistic, like that weird relationship it has to the real and fictional at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Zinnia, did you want to ask your question, and then we'll move on to the question and answer period with the attendees here?
Sure. Yeah. I was just interested in something you said, Birthe, about the stuff, and I'm often thinking about the stuff, the objects, and like I'm so grateful that I have these materials to work with, and that my family also has appreciation for the stuff. Even like you said, like this bowl is like from this person, or like this place in time, or whatever, this like different artifacts, and like that's constantly what I'm able to kind of return to as a starting place, and like I'm so grateful for having that. But also like having all of this stuff can also be a burden, because it's kind of like, what do you do with it? So like maybe you photograph it to, maybe you have to get rid of the actual thing, but you have to keep the photo as the evidence. So yeah, I was just wondering, like, how do you deal with this stuff? It seemed like maybe, Carol, you have a lot of stuff with this project. How did you deal with the stuff? Yeah.
Yeah, I felt, maybe I'll just answer it quickly, because I felt like some of the things, I still have some of the things. And I feel like I just kept photographing something like those plexiglass stands, hoping that eventually they would become vacated of their charge they had on me, and I could just get rid of them. And I don't know if I've reached that point yet, but there's something about like somehow photographing it that you can somehow claim it, or release its hold on you, or I don't know. I don't know if I'm successful. but was it like for you, Birthe? Like with your apparently were getting rid of a lot of things, and it seems like part of your photographing was maybe releasing them, or I don't know.
Yeah. For sure. Even though I wasn't, like when I was taking the pictures, I wasn't that quite sure if these objects will, make it, or if they will be, it wasn't so much of a conscious decision of like, oh, I'm taking a picture of this now, because I will probably get rid of it. It was more like the things that really spoke to me, and some of them are still like they made it. They're still they're in the new home. Others we got rid of, and my parents haven't been like, you know, they were born during the Second World War and grew up right after, like, you know, like in like post-war Germany, and where everything was really scarce, and they really had a bit of a, yeah, they didn't really have much when they were young, and so I think that's why they tended to be hoarders. They really hung on to everything, and we had a big basement in our home, and I remember as a child, and my dad was just like, no, don't throw this out, we can still use that. And you know, and so there was something also incredibly liberating to, I feel like as a family we just like shed so much of and we still hang, like my dad held on to also a lot of things, and I was like, Dad, we won't have a basement, you need to let go of this, like I don't know where you want to put this. But overall, like we let go of a lot of things, and it felt like really liberating. And there's this beautiful book, No Archive Will, no, what was that? Julieta saying, No Archive Will Restore You. I feel like I'm butchering the title, but it is something like that. Julieta Singh, and she's speaking about the relationship of objects to objects, and she says, and I wrote that down earlier. I was like, because I was like, that was this beautiful quote, that objects have power in and of themselves, but also power in contact with us that is collaboratively created. And then she goes on, and in the book, that, and sometimes you just, and then once you created that power, and then there's also the power that comes in like releasing that, you know, releasing them to the thrift store, or, and so I feel like that's really like the journey. Sometimes there's certain objects where you're just like, no, they just, right, they're just so precious. But overall, like you just, there's also something like, yeah, the power was created, but then it's also, it's gone, and you can release it, and that feels really liberating.
Mm.
I think as artists, we're so implicated in that idea of an object having the power to be really compelling. I mean, that's part of why we become artists, is we hope to make objects that will be compelling, or images that will be compelling to people that want to spend time with. So we're implicated. It's like we're not outside of that. But yeah, it can be a real hazard.
Yeah, it's hard to know when to release it, like you said, but yeah, I haven't really had to make those decisions yet, so I worry about that sometimes.
Yeah, I related to what you said, Birthe, because my parents grew up during the Depression in the US, and so they were poor as children, and they reused things and saved things, and there was this idea of like, oh, you never know when that might be handy. Like,
Exactly.
They had a huge house full of things that, you know, never really came to be handy, that I had to deal with.
Yeah.
With that, how about we move into thank you so much for that great question, Zinnia. How about we move into the Q&A? So if any members of the, any attendees have a question, you can raise your hand, and then I'll say your name, and then Anna will unmute you. So I need to make sure I can see. I don't have this set up properly. Here. Let's see. Participant panel. There we go. Okay. So yeah, anyone have a question? You can use the raise hand function, or you can type your question into the chat and I can read it aloud, whichever you prefer.
Right. And that's in the reactions in the bottom right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Reactions. Yeah.
Oh, Medwin. Hi, Medwin. Thank you.
I'll just give a minute.
Nice that you were here. Thank you so much.
Okay. If there are no questions, Catherine's back. Catherine was having some technical difficulties, but she's returned. Did you have a question, Catherine?
I do have a question, Kate. Thank you. Sorry, folks. Yes, of course, I have unstable internet. Who knows how that happens after years of
Always on
pandemic.
the presentation day.
Right.
Yeah.
I was thinking, Zinnia, about what you were saying about kind of like when the work was ready to be shown to the public. And one of the beautiful things that I have the privilege of is seeing people react to all of these works and hearing some of those personal stories. And I'm just curious if any of you have had that opportunity to kind of get that direct feedback from viewers of your work and sort of how they're responding to it, or if that's something that you actually prefer to kind of step back from and just let it exist out in the world.
Yeah, I mean, I have had the incredible opportunity to be around and give, tours of the work and things like that. And again, like even have my own family come and see and react to the work too. And it's like really lovely to have people, relate their own family experiences to the work. But also, yeah, I think it's important that people have their own space to also make their own interpretations. So yeah, no, that's why I keep making. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if I had many opportunities to hear people respond or be with people in the space, and but I, because of the book format and because of it having been out in the world for a while now, I get, sometimes I get an email, or I get yeah, just like a little note, something that people are like, oh, I came across your book, and it really spoke to me, or it really resonated, or I found it incredibly moving, and then they will share maybe also their own story of how they experienced a relative's dementia or Alzheimer's, and the loss of a loved one. And I think that's something like I had another conversation the other day about, when you're making work about family and you're making very personal work, and walking that line, or having that balance of like, well, it's my family. And I remember my niece actually saying at some point, when I was like, when she asked me, like when she was really little, like, who are these, what are you doing with these pictures? And I'm like, well, I might show them at some point. I show them to people. And she's like, but it's us, like, but why would you show somebody else? Like, it's us. And so I think there's always like that, obviously, when you make like work, but especially when you're making really personal work, of like, well, why would anybody else care, right? The little bit of that, like, it's my family, it's my experience, like, why show that, right? And so I think that's like always like this little, like this dance of like, the personal and the universal, because obviously these experiences are really like my personal experiences and my very own history and my family's history, but at the same time they're standing in for an experience that is really quite universal, like for all of us, right? Like, we all have family, and whether that is a complicated relationship, a fraught relationship, a loving relationship, we all come from somewhere, right? And so I think that's the power. That's where the power is of when you're making work about it, or like the best case scenario is like that people can find themselves in it, in a way, and that the emotion carries through, or that there's something that triggers, that gets triggered in that process, that is meaningful for them, and lets them take something away from it.
Yeah, I've shown this video and some of the photographs, I think 3 times now. And at first it did feel like, it's so personal, will anybody relate? But then of course it's like, a lot of people do relate, because we're all human, we all have families, we all come from families, and we've all experienced some kind of loss of a loved one. And a lot of people my age have had the experience of like having to deal with their parents downsizing or dying and dealing with stuff, so even though it feels so particular, there's a lot of recognition, and I think that's one of the fabulous things about photography, is that it's so easy to enter, and video, like, so, like, with Zinnia, with your work, like, I was just like so close to my inventing a historical character that would have these adventures, and like here was your grandma, like this real life, like doing this crazy thing, So photographs are so easy to enter into, and they have this relation to the real that makes them feel so accessible. We all have a relationship to photographs. We all have family photographs. We all have family, So there's so many entry points in all of these pieces for that.
I see we have a question from someone in the audience, Alessandra Abale, and I just am conscious of time because our meeting might end in a minute. So Alessandra, I can ask to unmute.
Hi, thank you so much for the really engaging discussion, and I'll be quick with my question. And you had briefly touched on it during the discussion, but I'm just wondering, when you're dealing with working with family and family photos, what the conversations around consent from your family members, or questions of ethically producing images that have your family members that especially when it's fraught relationships with family members, I guess. Yeah, I'm just wondering what each of your processes are like in that respect when creating the work.
I can go first. So yeah, for me, my family was has been really, it's been a really collaborative process. I want to say they were so used to me taking pictures because I've been basically taking pictures of them from the beginning. And my dad's father was a photographer, and so my dad grew up with all these images of himself as well. And as I said earlier, I stopped taking pictures of my mother when I felt like she when she didn't know what was going on anymore, and I couldn't get her consent, and she wasn't a collaborator anymore. And I showed them the work. They're really, there was a moment where my dad, I think there was a big, a picture of him, one of the portraits of him was printed on a big page in a Swiss newspaper, on the cover page. And I showed it to him, and that was the first time where he was like, this is too much. He was just like, oh, it's a little it's all me. No, that was just where he felt kind of a little bit uncomfortable. But in general, I have a very loving and close relationship with them, and I think that maybe was the part that they don't question me, in the sense of what I'm doing this is who I am, which is really wonderful. I felt really throughout it, even by my nephew and niece, really supported in it. For I had the pleasure when they were really, really young, they were really keen on, because Auntie Birthe is here and now it's picture time. I have this really old bulky camera and a light meter, an external light meter. And I would get them, involved, and my nephew would meter the light, and so it was kind of this really a family project. And so they were really supportive in it, and they really participated, so I'm very fortunate in that way. I never felt that they didn't want this, and with the book, they're really happy to have that book. And so, yeah. That's me. I guess it's just I'm really lucky to have such a supportive family in that way.
Yeah, I feel the exact same. I think it's just years of trust, and too, it's been I think of the first photo project I ever made, I took photos of my parents, and so then it's been just an evolving thing since then. And we also it's lucky that we've developed this way of working. Like it is collaborative, but at the same time, I also do have to kind of like remove myself in some instances, as in like I can't tell them like every single thing that I'm doing, or even like many times I've asked them to be like for one of the photos where I'm in the garden, my dad took that photo and I didn't explain what the photo was about. I was just like, okay, focus the camera and like please like press the shutter here, and didn't really explain what it was about. And then we just kind of have developed this level of trust where it's like kind of like, okay, this is the end result. But I do like make check-in points. Like, so for example, when I'm writing about the work, I wrote an essay for the book, I made sure that that was all like accurate, and my mom was like comfortable with everything I was saying. And I've done talks with her as well, like public talks with her as well. And yeah, so it's just like, I guess, years of trust, and also just really lucky to have a lot of support in that area.
Yeah, I don't have any family in Vancouver. So I grew up in the eastern US, and my family is all there. And so my parents were here, but I was the youngest child, and so I was the one that transplanted. So I felt like I kind of just took the liberty to, because of the experience had so much fallen on me, to dismantle this house and to deal with the estate that I didn't think to ask permission. I just did it to help myself to process it. And I didn't know if I was ever going to show it, actually, But then in selecting what I might show in the public, I tried to pick things that were not totally personal, that I felt like there were entry points for people that didn't know my story or my family's story, but it was like just more aesthetically interesting and dealing with. But it's been interesting now showing it a few times, that I've had a lot of conversations with people about the experience of being left to deal with after a long illness of a parent, and the exhaustion and the demands of that, then kind of having to deal with all this stuff, and just how peculiar an experience that is. It doesn't even really matter what the stuff is. It's just kind of like, oh my God, the weight of the responsibility of just the material things. So I'm gratified that there do seem to be entry points for people, and my siblings have been supportive. Nobody's criticized me about it, which is very lovely. I think I have had conversations with them about it when I first showed it, but that's a while ago now, and I can't remember the contents of it. But yeah, potentially fraught, but so far so good.
Thank you all for kind of bringing that final note to trust, because I think that really speaks beautifully to the nature of the works that are presented in this exhibition. So we have reached the end of our time today, and I just want to give a little reminder to everyone that we have a closing reception to come out and see the work in person and spend time with this beautiful exhibition. And that is taking place on Sunday, April 24th from 2 to 4 p.m. So I hope that those of you who are local are able to join us for that. And I wish our audiences a wonderful day. Enjoy your Saturday, and hopefully it's sunny out your windows as well.
Yeah, thanks everybody for coming.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you. We might have to remove.
Stop recording.